It's really good to be with you all. We're delighted to have so many folks to join us in this process that we've invited you to go through a kind of Quaker process of discernment about our individual and collective Earthcare Witness. And we'd like to do that today out of a kind of modified version of a meeting for worship. So in this next portion, we're going to have three speakers: Jay O'Hara, Peter Garrett, and Andy Burt. And I'll invite them to each speak out of the silence for 15 minutes or so, and to allow a little silence between each so that we can hear the echo and allow the resonance as we hear about their life journeys and the kinds of leadings and learnings around Earthcare Witness that they have to share. I'm very much looking forward to each of their stories. And then when all three of them have presented, we'll pause and go into breakout rooms to provide each of you in small groups with a chance to have some discussion around a query that we'll pose then. But with that introduction, let me ask Jay to start off after suitable silence, and when he feels ready to, Jay, when you feel ready to speak out of it, please go ahead, okay?
You already know how to fight for freedom. You already know how to sing with God. You already know what you believe in. So don't pretend that you forgot. You're remembering. You're remembering. You already know how to fight for freedom. You already know how to sing with God. You already know what you believe in. So don't pretend that you forgot. You're remembering. You're remembering. You're remembering. Friends, what I'm going to bring you this morning, or what I think I'm being given you this morning, is not a thing to do, but a way to be. Not a way you must be or a way anyone has to be, but an invitation to a way. That is a thread of being, a way of being that threads back through our Quaker history, that threads back through the Christian tradition and the stories and life of Jesus and those who surrounded him and those who came after him. That threads back further through the lines of the prophets and of Moses, and threads back through stories that we don't even know, of those who were called in a time of rising empires and domination and control and patriarchy and supremacy, stories of lives that lived in radical obedience to something more holy than all of that. I want to invite you again, not into a thing to do, but a way of being. In the song I just sang, which is by a person from North Carolina named KJ Song, the words speak not to something that we need to learn or some new thing that we need to take on, but to remembering not only those stories that have permeated our tradition, that have been passed down to us of how to resist, but remembering that which in our very bones, in our hearts, in our connection with which is divine, knows something deeper and older and truer than that which we were socialized into, that which we have come to expect as the way of being. For this time, I want to offer a very simple, maybe it's simplistic, concept to hang our hats on. Biblical scholar and Catholic scholar John Dominic Crossan writes about, in his book, The Birth of Christianity, writes about how the early Christian communities before the time of Constantine and the co-optation of the Christian movement by the empire, how those early communities had a vitality in them that was caused by a creative tension between two dynamics within them. He called these two maybe types of people or personalities, or these two central dynamics, the itinerants and the householders. Now, the itinerants are what actually show up a lot in the Gospels. They're those Jesus-y types who wander off into the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. They are the roving, in Acts, there are those roving bands of prophets and disciples who let go of their lives and travel from, like Paul, from place to place, maybe having a little side job of tent making to keep themselves going, but by and large are in some way giving their whole entirety over to the direction of the Spirit, the gift of the divine to keep them alive and sustain them as it flows through, whether it's the milk and honey in the wilderness or through through God as manifested in people. And he talks also of the householders, those who are settled in their communities, who were deeply ingrained in, maybe even a little more so in the ways of the world. They probably had student loans. They probably had to pay their mortgage and had normal jobs like everybody else. They probably had to make sure that they got the kids picked up from daycare and to soccer practice on time. And it was the tension of these two ways of being rubbing against each other that created in some way the dynamism of the early Christian movement. So too, that dynamism arose in the early Quaker movement. And the valiant 60, those named friends, those that we know of who traveled widely and freely in the ministry in England in the 1650s, spreading the good news there, that there was a different way of being other than conformed to the political and economic and social expectations of the time. Those itinerants carried with them a new annunciation of this light within, this way of knowing inwardly that is in everyone and that can guide us in our even smallest and our biggest choices if we tune in and listen to it. The difference of these two, I think, is the amount of time that is available for making oneself available to God and to listening. Those itinerants, being unencumbered, have that luxurious opportunity to listen at every moment, because the diaper does not need changing, the bills do not need paid, the phone calls do not need to be made, and the committee meetings do not need to be attended by the itinerant. As that grew in the Quaker movement, of course, that kind of got more formalized into the traveling ministry, which may be more familiar to us at this time. And I am convinced that in this moment, we are, as a religious society, desperately in need of rebalancing those two pieces of this dynamic duo, the itinerants and the householders. We have become a religious society of householders. And my invitation and question to you is, how do we find, nurture, and liberate the itinerants either within us or among us? Because it is in those crazy itinerants coming back to us and saying, yay! I mean, this is a great looking meeting house, but like Jesus suggested, we should probably sell it and move on with the business of creating a world of justice. And those householders who say, you know, you're a little crazy and I'm not sure anyone's really going to take you that seriously. Why don't you come down and ground yourself among us? Friends, that voice you may recognize, the latter voice of the householder, is well known among the Religious Society of Friends in the 21st century. And the itinerants are further afield. I want to invite you, as you consider what it is that calls you and how you are called to engage in climate work or engage with Earthcare work or to respond to the climate crisis, to think of this not as a climate crisis or a crisis in the environment, but to clear space, to imagine, if we think of this as a crisis of faith, what new orientations and ways of being might we step into? My faith in God and my faith in the Spirit is that if we clear that space, we each as individuals and as a body of friends will be called to the place exactly where we are needed to be and in our most powerful. We do not lack for things to do, friends, but we do lack for power. Not power that comes from earthly power that that Jesus was tempted by Satan by in the wilderness, but power that comes that is God's power that flows through us and transforms the world around us. I can't say what it is for you to do that. I invite you to think of, in our time together, that rebalancing of householders and itinerants. To close, just want to bring that song back one more time. You already know how to fight for freedom. You already know how to sing with God. You already know what you believe in. So don't pretend that you forgot. You're remembering, remembering, remembering. You're remembering, remembering, remembering. You're remembering.
Thank you, Jay. And now it's my turn, and I'm going to ask you all to do something a bit different here. Go to the top right corner of your screen where it says View, and go to Speaker View. And Bob, I wonder if you could either put me on share screen or else share the screen that I sent to you earlier. So I'm going to, in preparing this, I was thinking about who I am and how I came to be and why do I do what I do. And so I'm going to share with you a few pictures from my past, and it's going to lead to something that I think is going to resonate with you and your thoughts around, and particularly climate. So just to begin with, this is my family, and I'm the boy standing in the background, and my big brother is right next to me, and my father and mother. My father was, he was a leprosy doctor in Nigeria, which is where I was born. And my two sisters, one older, one much younger, as you could see, and a neighbor who was kind enough to bring us to the airport on my last trip to Nigeria, before my father had passed on at the hospital to his Nigerian colleagues. And so he came home to live with us in England. Next, please, Bob. So before we leave, my mother and father were very caring people and always looking out for what needed to be done in the community. And I've picked up on that. It's just one of those things, and you probably have the same thoughts about your parents. Next, please. So here's, you see that blue dot on the northeast coast of England? That's where my family went to the coast. And you can see the kind of patch of gray all over the North Sea and much of England and all of Ireland. That's the extent of the ice during the Ice Age. And what I saw in the cliffs at that point on the coast was the chalk formation pushed up into the cliffs by the ice, the edge of that ice sheet. So when I was quite young, I became aware of the climate change with the last ice age. Next, please. And then I spent a year on with the British equivalent of the Peace Corps in the Bahamas, of all places. Okay, so spent a lot of time walking on the beach, and like you do, noticed that above the mid-tide, your feet sink in. So what is that? I was wondering. It's actually because the waves wash over the sand and trap air underneath, and there are air bubbles in the sand, which is why your feet sink in. Next, please. So this is all to do with science. I was a geologist, and I was investigating the geology of the Bahamas for the point of actually developing water supplies for the Bahamas. And this picture is a picture of actually 125,000-year-old beach bubbles. And the peculiar thing about this was that this rock was found about 20 or 25 feet above present sea level. In other words, we tend to think of sea level as being constant because it's always been constant to our knowledge in our immediate surroundings, and even going back to the Roman times and beyond. It seems more or less constant. This shows that it isn't constant at all. Next, please. Then I spent some time as a professor of geology at the University of Libya. And this shows that in the desert, these are cave paintings in the desert, show cattle and savanna, say giraffes, where no water flows now. Huge climate change. I started thinking about climate change a long time ago, in other words. Next, please. And here's another image back from back in the Bahamas. This is called a blue hole for obvious reasons. And that thing in the middle of it is a diving platform. This blue hole is 400 feet deep. And it's not an ocean feature. It's a freshwater feature. The limestone of which the Bahamas is made dissolved during the last ice age, when sea level was 400 feet lower. Whoa, climate change? We ain't seen nothing. Next, please. This is a photograph, I have to admit, I didn't take, but it's a picture of where the extent of the ice during the last ice age was. All over Maine, half of North America, Greenland, the Arctic Ocean, and much of Northwest Europe, and even into Russia, some. Next, please. And and then I came to Maine, and I learned that there was a mile of ice over us, and all of this was covered by ice, moving these huge boulders all over the landscape, many of which you have seen, and maybe you've been to this particular place. Next, please. Then I met this man, Milutin Milankovic. I didn't actually meet him in person, but I learned what he had studied. He was a Serbian mathematician, and I'm not a mathematician, and but so I don't really know how he did it, but he figured out what made the ice ages and the interglacial periods. And so the pictures on the right are the particular things: precession, it's called, and the tilt of the Earth and the orbit of the Earth around the sun vary over periods of hundreds of tens or hundreds of thousands of years. And that was important to me at the time because I was studying coral reefs, and it was clear from a set of coral reefs in Barbados, as it so happens, that his theory was correct, and that that's what caused the natural cycles of the ice ages in the present climate cycle. Next, please. So I came to Maine in 1979 with a goal of building a passive solar home, which is on the left here. And I also bumped into the local newspaper to ask them to put more weather things in the paper. And they got me to write a weather column once a week. And so I had fun exploring the climate of Maine, the Ice Age climate, and then, our next please. And then I met James Hansen. James Hansen, here he is, addressing the United States Senate in 1988, talking about man-made climate from carbon dioxide emissions that he pointed out was increasing, and the senators, need to do something about it. Our next, please. And here's a picture of Charles Keeling, who was a scientist from San Diego, as a matter of fact, and he decided that it would be a good idea to measure carbon dioxide as it exists in Earth's atmosphere on a place far distant from any emission sources, cars or chimneys. So he picked the summit of Mauna Loa, and these points, these little black dots, are his measurements. And you can see that in 1988, about halfway up that graph, it's still going up, and that's what James Hansen quite clearly saw as a real danger point. That's where he pointed out to the Senate, this is a trend that we can't allow to continue, because it's actually warming the Earth. Next, please. Here's another person I met. I actually have met this man in person. His name is Michael Mann. He's at the University of Pennsylvania. And this is what he put together a bunch of data for the last 1,000 years. The red data on the right is the temperature data that were of measurements in the last 150 years, from about the 1850s or so, where the temperature is clearly going up quite sharply. The other data, the blue and the black lines, are data from corals and from ice cores. So you can tell that I'm a scientist. I appreciate the scientific information coming to us. And I also recognize, like Michael Mann, like James Hansen, and like Charles Keeling, that this is a danger point that we've got to do something about. Okay, next, please. And then, of course, the news comes to us. Wildfires, trees pushed over by wild windstorms. Bottom on the left shows what would be flooded in Portland, given only a 3.5 foot rise in sea level plus a storm surge. And then on the right hand, bottom right, is drought. So wildfires, wild windstorms, rising sea level, and drought are things that we are faced with given the climate threat. So what to do about it? Next, please. Oh, I beg your pardon. Here's one more thing. Heat, extreme heat. This is actually a picture from the internet of the extreme heat that was seen in India, enough to melt the tarmac on this road. By the way, many of us are not aware that heat stroke is one of the major causes of death from from climate change, and it seems to be increasing with time. Although one year it'll be really hot in one place, in one year it was Paris, and then and the next and a few years either earlier or later, I can't remember, in Russia, believe it or not. So, all right, next please. So what to do? Well, I joined a group called Citizens Climate Lobby because they really appealed to me in that they have a, I should say, we have a particular policy. It's an economic policy that we can take to our members of Congress. So here we are sitting with Susan Collins, and the people around the table are the former mayor of Bangor, a student from the university, mayor's wife, and a doctor, and a couple of other people, two at the far end taking notes furiously because the staff people to Susan Collins depend upon, I beg your pardon, she depends on their taking good notes and advising her in various ways. So why am I doing this? It occurs to me that this is part of our kind of Quaker heritage. I don't know if you're aware of the fact that George Fox, with actually in his case, dozens or hundreds of his Quaker friends in jail, went to see the king. And I managed to get at least some of them out of jail because of what the king said. Well, here we're not meeting with the king, we're meeting with the Collins. But the next one, our next, please. So here is the king, and here is the Collins, and also Shelley Pingree and Jared Golden. And I recognize these people as friends. And when we go in to meet with them, we meet with them in a very special way. And we, for instance, we never go into a lobby meeting with any of them without complimenting them on something, without making them feel good for the service they're doing for the country. And also asking them, is there anything that we can help you with understanding the climate crisis, with understanding the solutions that you are uniquely placed to put into action? So we're kind of trained, and actually we work with the Friends Committee on National Legislation to engage with them, to see that of God in every one of them. So next, please. And lastly, this is these are two reasons, at least, for why I do my work. These are my grandsons, but everybody else's grandsons and granddaughters deserve the same kind of assistance in every way we can. Thank you.